Thank you, Josh. I appreciate the kind introduction. I'm Charlie Parker. I'm alcoholic. You get settled back in here. I swear to God, sometimes when they're doing all that reading, it feels like Josh is going to go, okay, now Dan's going to read the Old Testament, you know, in Hebrew, but I'm glad it's my turn. I'm so happy to be here, guys. It's a few things I want to say up front. Please forgive my voice. I had some throat surgery and it didn't go entirely well. I got to go back in, but they did find out it's not cancer. But if you guys can put up with it for an hour, I'll get through it. You know, it doesn't hurt. It's just I won't be hitting any high notes tonight. You know, but my name is Charlie Parker. I'm alcoholic. My sobriety date is March 22nd of 1985, and for that I'm truly grateful. I'm sober 35 years, which is great, except for my wife has 5 months more sobriety than I do. Katie's in the back of the house giving a Zoom talk on her computer, and I'm up here, but she thinks it's a big deal that she's sober longer than I do. Sometimes around here, if I'm struggling, she'll say, well, honey, just stick around for 5 more months and it'll start making more sense to you. But, AA is alive and well in our house, and my home group is the primary purpose group of Alcoholics Anonymous in Austin, Texas. I live in Austin, Texas. I grew up in Dallas, but I've been in Austin for 40 years, over 40 years. And my home group is the primary purpose group. It's a line-by-line big book study. We study the big book week after week, line by line. And it's just a lot more fun than it sounds like. I mean, you know, there was a time when I might not have been terribly drawn to that meeting, but, you know, I used to go around and say that we run 225 people on a Tuesday night in Austin, Texas at a big book study. And we were running, you know, right around there, 225, 250. And when one of my sponsors told me that now we have Zoom meetings and room meetings. And when we were having our room meetings, we were running about 225 people, but 2 or 3 of our members took it online, and you know, a bunch of us old farts weren't that excited about it, but they put it together, and we've been running like 600 people on our Zoom meeting, and it's really been powerful. People from all over the world have been coming to that meeting. We got people in Europe staying up till 1:30 in the morning to log into the meeting. But it's funny that they're we better mute all in. Josh, can you mute all in? Attaboy. Hey, when we decided to go back to room meetings 2 weeks ago, we started meeting in person. And we have a limit of 60 people right now, but we moved the Zoom meeting to Wednesday nights. And of course, I booked this talk before I knew that we were going to be meeting on Wednesday night. So they'll be meeting here in about 15 minutes. But I put our Zoom information in the chat box, and we'd love to have you join us some Wednesday night. And you know, I was afraid we were going to lose a bunch of people when we moved from Tuesday night to Wednesday night. But last Wednesday was our first meeting on Wednesday night on Zoom, and we had 480 people. So it's a really powerful big book study, and we've gone back to the front of the book. Well, not the very front. We started in the doctor's opinion, and it takes us a long time to get through the book. But if you know, we're right at the very beginning of doctor's opinion right now. My sponsor is Myers. Before that, my deceased sponsor, it was a man named Mark Houston, and he was a very powerful man. I hope to get around to talking to him some. But anyway, I want to get going. I love doing this, but I got to get going because the time goes by faster than it seems like it will. This is the part of the talk where you always think like you got all the time in the world, and then next thing you know, you look up and you got 10 minutes to try to cover the last 20 years of sobriety or something. But you know what? In AA, we talk about coming out of our own experience, and there's a little joke I like to tell to warm the room up, and it reminds me of us talking about coming out of our own experience. And it's a joke that some of you may have heard before. I know some of you have heard me tell it before, but it's a good joke, and I like the way I tell it. So here it comes. And it's about this guy that's driving along one day, and he's passing by this farmhouse, and he sees a sign on the front gate, and it says "Talking Dog for sale." And he can't stand it. He goes up to the farmhouse, and he asks this guy. He says, "So you got a talking dog?" And the guy goes, "Yeah, he's around back." And he wanders around back, and this old dog's laying there, and he walks up to the dog. He goes, "So you can talk?" And the dog says, "Well, I certainly can." And he goes, "My God, how did that happen?" He goes, "Well, it's actually a very interesting story." So when I was young, I started picking up some language skills from the humans that I interacted with. And as I got older, I started picking up some of the nuances of the language. I started working with slang and colloquialisms and that sort of thing. And he goes, "It's just made a fabulous life for me." I had a 19-year career in the Drug Enforcement Administration. I've traveled the world and stayed in some of the finest hotels in the world. And he says, "But more interesting than me, some of my puppies have learned foreign languages and have become international diplomats." He said, "I have 2 pups right now that are in the United Nations building as international diplomats." The guy goes, "My God, it's just been fascinating talking to you." And he goes back up front where that old farmer's sitting there. He goes, "Man, how much do you want for that dog?" And the guy thinks about it. He goes, "I don't know, $40. And he's like, "Why on earth would you sell a fabulous dog like that for $40? And the farmer thinks for a second. He goes, "Oh, none of that crap he told you is true." It's kind of like that around here. It doesn't matter how good the story is if it's not my experience. I mean, alcoholics can smell a line of bull from a mile away. So let me get going here. I grew up in Dallas. I'm a Dallas boy. I've lived in Texas most of my life, but I live in Austin now. I come from a pretty normal family. I don't know what a functional family is exactly, but I can tell you that I've heard enough fifth steps over the years to know that a lot of people had it a lot worse than I did growing up. There wasn't any drinking in our house. I grew up Southern Baptist. There was fine principles and fine people all around. And my father was a salesman, and my mother was a school teacher, first grade school teacher, for 42 years. And I was darn well prepared for the first grade. I actually kind of kicked ass a little bit in the first grade, but I don't know. There's a couple of things I had a sister that's 5 years, I have a sister that's 5 years older than I am, and she's perfect. She's all everything. She was National Honor Society first chair flute player, drum major, and then here comes me, her kind of thuggish little brother. And I grew up. Anybody else grew up under the burden of potential? Anybody else grew up? All I heard about was potential growing up. It's like, why can't you apply yourself? I still don't know how to do that. If you could be, why can't you be more like Charles Moliere across the street? And I don't know. I mean, I don't know that any of that stuff made me alcoholic. I don't know what did. It's funny. I think a lot of us, when we get here, we're trying to figure out what is it that made me an alcoholic. Did something happen to me? Something did happen to me. I've come to believe that it's not even really that important. It's kind of like if you're out hiking in the woods and you look up and there's a mountain lion getting ready to pounce on you. It doesn't really matter how he got there. It's like, you're not going to stand there and go, "Well, no, that's peculiar. They're not typical for this region." I mean, it's like, we got to get the heck out of here. It's the same way with alcoholism. I've come to believe now that I caught that genetic bullet, and my sister didn't. It's funny, I was surrounded by alcoholism in my family, but none of it was in my immediate family. My mother, my father, my sister, nobody drank except for me. And I started as soon as I could. Well, none of that stuff made me an alcoholic, but what does? I mean, Josh talked about it a little bit. He talked about, and it turns out that as an alcoholic, I want to get through this pretty fast because there's a lot of stuff I want to talk about tonight. As an alcoholic, I got 2 problems with alcohol. One happens to me when I drink it. The other one happens to me when I don't drink it. Other than that, I don't struggle with alcohol. That's supposed to be a joke. You know, sometimes I like to tell a joke just to see if everybody's staring at the little boxes on their computer. I mean, Zoom has changed everything about going to. This is my impersonation of somebody at an AA meeting these days. You got to at least be kind of subtle about it. Sometimes it gets a little creepy, but you know. Anyway, back to what I was talking about. You know, because to my mother, it seemed like he's a pretty good guy when he's not drinking. You know, and she didn't. You know, so what is it that makes me an alcoholic? You know, all this is right here is a large print copy of the Big Book. My sponsor is a bookbinder. And this is just a large print copy of the Big Book. And right here on the title page is the first promise in the Big Book. It says the story of how many thousands of men and women have recovered from alcoholism. Now it's funny, you know, right there on the title page, I'm already seeing something that's different from what I heard in a lot of the AA meetings I've sat in for a long time. Now the thing though about it, before I get too far into this, you hear recovered, and one of the things I see in Alcoholics Anonymous, though, is that whenever we form a firing squad, we always form a circle. And we got some of our best members picking each other off over whether it's recovered or recovering, or sponsee or protege, or twofold illness, threefold illness. But the one thing I will say is don't let anybody read your Big Book for you. If you have a firm belief, just ask yourself, where does that belief come from? And is it consistent with our literature? And if you're comfortable with it, rock on. I don't care whether you say recovered or recovered, you know, so, but what if we were talking on the forward of the first edition, it says the story of how many thousands, it says we have Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from what? From a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. You know, so if what we're talking about is recovering from a hopeless state of mind and body, what is it we're talking about? Well, that's what I'm talking about. I got two problems with alcohol. The first one happens when I'm drinking it. Second happens when I'm not drinking it. The first one is the physical aspect of alcoholism, and it talks about it beautifully in the doctor's opinion in the first 23 pages of the Big Book. It talks about this physical response to alcohol, that something happens to me when I drink that ain't regular. And, you know, and I never really knew what it was, but on Roman numeral 28 in the book, in the doctor's opinion, it says something interesting. He had written a paper a few years earlier on alcoholism, and now he's talking about it. It says, we believe, and so suggested a few years ago, that the action of alcohol on who? On these chronic alcoholics is a manifestation of an allergy. That the phenomenon of craving is limited to this class and never occurs in the average temperate drinker. So that's this physical response to alcohol. It says that when I drink, it triggers this phenomenon. He calls it an allergic reaction, right? An allergic reaction just means an abnormal physical response to something. And what is my response to alcohol that's abnormal? It's this craving. When I take a drink, and I want to say this, the most important thing you can do with anything I say, or anything this book says, is lay it up against your experience and see if it's a fit, right? So we'll see if this is what we believe strongly, and turn in statements into questions in the Big Book. You know, is this my experience? Is this true for me based on what I look, and when I look back over my drinking history? And it says that when I take a drink, it triggers this phenomenon of craving. Well, the problem was, it triggers this phenomenon of craving that I don't have the power to control. But the thing about it was, I didn't know I'd ever triggered the phenomenon of craving. Nobody talked like that, right? I just thought I changed my mind. Anybody ever go in to have a couple of drinks and you change your mind? You know, it's like, yeah, I'm just going to have a couple of drinks after work with the guys, you know, and then you have a couple of drinks and you go, you know what, I changed my mind. Turns out 2's a bad number. I think 7. You know, 7's a good number. I don't know what I'm going to talk about tonight, but I do got to tell you about this guy one time. I met a guy at this sober house in Las Vegas one time. And I mean, I just fell in love with this guy. Katie and I were doing a meeting at the sober house, and we're sitting there, and this guy who's one of the clients at the meeting, and he says, we're sitting there, and he goes, man, it sucks that I'm alcoholic. We're listening, and he goes, I wish I wasn't alcoholic so I could drink all the time. And I was like, I mean, do you not love that guy? You know, he goes, and he follows it up by going, I just wish I could have like 7 drinks, you know? And I was like, that is my man right there. Not 1, not 2, but 7 seems reasonable, you know? And I mean, can't you just see him though? He lands in Alcoholics Anonymous and he goes, man, how bad is my luck? The one thing that I really love doing, I got to be allergic to it, you know? Why can't I be gluten intolerant or something, you know? But no, I got to be allergic to alcohol, you know? But anyway, how does that allergy show up? It says it triggers this craving for more booze. Well, it talks about it a lot in the doctor's opinion and the first 23 pages. But if the biggest problem I have is what happens to me when I drink alcohol, my answer would be real simple, right? Just don't drink alcohol. But here comes the second piece of alcoholism. On page 23, it says, all these observations about what happens when I drink wouldn't mean squat if I never took the first drink. Well, it says it would be academic and pointless. But what it means is it wouldn't mean squat what happens to me when I drink if I never took a drink, right? I'm allergic to poison ivy too. But the difference between my allergy to poison ivy and my allergy to alcohol is I've never once been out in the woods and looked over and gone, oh, hold on just a minute. I think that's poison ivy. You know, and off comes my shirt and I just go roll in it, you know, because I don't have this mental obsession with alcohol. If you show me, I mean, with poison ivy, if you show me what it looks like, I'll stay out of it. But it ain't like that with alcohol, because here's the second piece of alcoholism. It says, they are restless, irritable, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks. And here's the really hard part. Drinks I see other people taking with impunity. You know what impunity means? It means they don't get punished for it. It means they can go have a couple of drinks and it doesn't cost them their job and their car and their self-respect and their dignity and all the values they grew up with and their bank account and their girlfriend. They just get to go have a couple of drinks. But I get so uncomfortable sober that after a while, I start wanting to know where's mine. How come this Nimrod gets to go have a couple of drinks and I don't? And when I get uncomfortable enough, well, it says I get restless. I don't like the way my clothes are touching me. I get irritable. Now that's a tough one. You know, irritable is pretty uncool. I don't want to be described as irritable. But it's not my fault if I become keenly aware of how stupid everybody else is, right? You know, let me go a couple of weeks without a drink, and all of a sudden everybody are idiots, you know? And then it says, I don't like the deal I get. I get discontented. Well, what it all adds up to is I get so uncomfortable that it brings about this mental obsession. And the mental obsession makes me powerless over taking the first drink. And when I take the first drink, I trigger the phenomenon of craving, which makes me powerless over the second drink. So I get trapped into this terrible cycle where I drink and I drink and I drink and I drink until I have to stop. And now I stop and things are a little better. It looks like it's going to be okay. I might keep the job. She may not leave. You know, and that's when I start getting restless, irritable, discontented, until the mental obsession gets on me until I have to finally drink. So I drink until I have to stop, and then I stop until I have to drink. And I drink until I have to stop, and I stop until I have to drink. And that's the terrible cycle of alcoholism. But, and if you're caught in that terrible cycle, believe me, there is a bottom below the bottom you know. I tell guys all the time, don't ever say it can't get any worse. You know, that just shows a lack of imagination. You know, you might look up in 3 years and go, God dang, I wish I'd quit back in 2020 when things were still going pretty good. But, you know, so anyway, the way this rolls out for me, I started drinking at 13, and about that time I got separated from the God of my childhood. I pulled out of church and that sort of thing. It was a weird time in America, and you know, just a lot of things were going strange. And about that time, it was the beginning of a real moral decline for me. And I really got started at 16, you know, and by the time I was 16, I'm going pretty good all the time. And, you know, I love the line where it says, to them, their alcoholic life seems the only normal one. You want to hear one of my favorite examples? I got a new example of our alcoholic life seems the only normal one. Check this out. This is a statistic that's going to blow your mind. You ready for it? Did you know that most people are born, live their whole lives, and die without ever being arrested? I know. That's what it's like. You know, if I was to call up my sainted 97-year-old mother and tell her, I got to go see my PO and get a UA, you know, because I got a DUI, she'd have no idea what I'm talking about. But and around here, we're like, oh man, that sucks. Who's your PO? You know, how much time you got? You know, my alcoholic life seems the only normal. Well, I'm using a lot of things to treat my spiritual malady, but I'm a big believer in singleness of purpose in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the main thing about singleness of purpose is this identification piece. You know, this thing about, you know, when I came in, the group I was going to, they had a big blow up. But the funny thing was, nobody was talking about singleness of purpose. I just heard people saying, they won't let you talk about dope over at the Northern Club. And, you know, people are going, well, dope's a part of my story. I'll talk about whatever I want. You know, and I've been on both sides of that argument, you know, because you'd have people going, and when they say it's part of my story, I want to go, well, you know, there's parts of your sex inventory that are part of your story too. And you don't feel so compelled to share those from the podium. You know, they're probably more interesting than your drug stories. But you know, why is it we talk about singleness of purpose? I didn't know I was going to talk about this tonight, but the big deal about it is this identification piece in Alcoholics Anonymous. It turns out that in AA, all we have to offer is identification and power, right? And how powerful is this identification piece we talk about? On page 18, not Roman number, on page 18 in our book, it's a very interesting piece. It says, psychiatrists and doctors who have dealt with this found it sometimes impossible to persuade an alcoholic to discuss his situation without reserve. We got to be the only group of people that will go pay a psychiatrist $200 an hour and lie to him the whole time. You know, I mean, if you think about it, if I go into a psychiatrist and he goes, tell me, Mr. Parker, do you drink? I'm not going to go, oh, yeah, buddy, I like me some drinking. You know, I'm going to say, well, I might have a couple of beers if I'm mowing the grass or something. You know? But I mean, listen to what it says. It says, strangely enough, wives, parents, and close friends find this even more unapproachable than do the doctor and the psychiatrist. But here's where it gets heavy. It says, but the ex-problem drinker who has found this solution, who is properly armed with the facts about himself, can generally win the entire confidence of another alcoholic in a few hours. And here's the heavy part. It says, until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. What'd they say? It said, most of us remember the first, you know, if you're like me, by the time you get to Alcoholics Anonymous, it's not the first time the topic of how loaded you get has been brought up. You know, people have been talking to me about my drinking for a while. But most of us remember the first time we talked to somebody that understood why I drank and what happens to me when I don't drink. Remember the first time you were with somebody where you go, oh, he gets it. You know, this guy gets it. And it says, until such an understanding is reached, little or nothing can be accomplished. Wow. So that identification piece in alcoholism is so important. When it's there, if I can tell that Ross drank like I did, and he's not drinking anymore, I might take direction from him that I don't even believe in yet, right? Once we have that identification and he's telling me he's over it, I'll be going, just tell me what to do, right? And when you think about the identification, I'm going ahead and talking about singleness purpose. The important part of it is it's so important that out of all the 12-step fellowships that are out there, and there's a ton of them. There's Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, Gamblers Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Debtors Anonymous. I even heard there's a lip balm addicts anonymous out there in case anybody's ever suffered from that heartbreaking malady. But you know, out of all the 12-step groups that are out there, the only difference in any of them is the first half of the first step and the middle part of the 12th step. What I'm powerless over and who I carry the message to. That identification piece is that important. If it wasn't for that identification piece, we'd all meet in the same room. But we got to have that identification. And the best way to talk about it is when it's not there. One of my favorite things to do about the identification is when we get invited to go speak at a conference somewhere, and they say, okay, Josh is going to pick you up at the airport. We're talking on the phone like we've been talking. And he goes, okay, I'll be at the airport. I'm about 6 feet. I go, don't even tell me. Just be in baggage claim and have your cell phone with you. And I can't even tell you how many times, it's a little game me and Katie like to play. I can't tell you how many times we've come off the plane, gone to the baggage claim, come down the little escalator, and you look around and you go, there's our boy right there. You know, and you walk over and go, are you Josh? He's like, yeah. How'd you know? And you're like, oh, I can feel you, brother. I mean, you know, it's, you know, I've missed a couple of times, but that identification piece is so, you know, that's why geographical cures don't work for us. You know, you can plop me down in San Francisco, and in 10 minutes, I'll look around and go, he looks like he parties, you know, and off we go again because we can sense each other. Well, I didn't know I was going to talk about that, but the last piece of it is, hopefully, you won't ever hear any of my sponsees in a meeting say I'm an alcoholic and anything, because it doesn't apply. To say that I'm because in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, we're identifying as alcoholics. If I go to a Gamblers Anonymous meeting, we would identify as gamblers. Saying I'm an alcoholic and something else, it'd be like saying I'm an alcoholic and a Texan, or I'm an alcoholic and a contractor. It doesn't matter because that's not what we're identifying on in this room tonight. Does that make sense? I hope so. Well, so back to my drinking. You know, good God, I got 20 minutes to get drunk and get sober for 35 years. I go back to my drinking, and you know, it started going downhill really fast. I started getting in a lot of trouble, and I started having, you know, I started committing crimes. Getting caught for crimes is even worse than committing crimes. And you know, I crashed into a police car one night, and another time, you know, on page 24, it talks about the loss of choice and control. And somewhere in my drinking, I lost the power to choose whether I was going to drink or not. And once I started drinking, I couldn't control how much I was going to drink. And the way I like to talk about that is the pawn shops. I loved pawn shops. I loved everything about pawn shops. You know, I mean, I loved there was no shame in their game. I don't ever remember a pawnbroker going, good God, man, what are you going to do with this money? You know, or weren't you just here this morning or something like that? It was never like that. You just walk in there with the deer rifle and they give you the money. And you walk in with the shotgun and they give you the money. And you know, I always had a plan. You know, we drunks make some brilliant plans. I mean, we do. We make plans. You could take over to the University of Southern Mississippi and show it to the business school, and they'd look at it and go, that's a pretty solid plan you got there, brother. You know, and our plans work right up till they quit working, you know. And my plan was that I had 90 days to get everything out of the pawn shop, you know. So that was my plan. Well, now, one thing about it I forgot to tell you is that I didn't own very much stuff. So I was having to pawn stuff that didn't belong to me. And that puts a little extra heat on the equation, but that's okay. We still got a plan. And usually, because in 90 days, I could pull something together that would get enough money to get everything out of the pawn shop. Well, one day though, I pulled an insurance scam, and it gave me enough money to go get everything out of the pawn shop. But I got to stop by the Spillway Pub. I used to drink at a little place called the Spillway Pub in Dallas. It was a wonderful little place, and they would let me run a $60 tab. This was in 1983, and it was really important to have that tab because you could drink for a minute for $60 back then. And so I'm just going to go by and settle my tab at the Spillway Pub. I'm not going to trigger the phenomenon of craving. I'm not, anything like that. I mean, nobody talked like that. I got to tell you, any of that stuff I was talking about, physical allergy, mental obsession, all that stuff, that's stuff I learned since I've been in AA. I promise you, I never wandered into the Spillway Pub and went, oh, Bobby, God almighty, the spiritual malady is on me today, and I had a beer on the way over here, and it has triggered a phenomenon of craving. Nobody talked like that, but I go by, and I'm just going to settle my tab, and then I'm going to go to all the pawn shops and get everything out of the pawn shop. Except I'm a blackout drinker. I blacked out a lot. I blacked out all the time. Oblivion was my goal. There are very few lines in our big book that don't apply to me. But one is, it says our stories are filled with countless vain attempts to prove that we could drink like normal men. I don't have any experience with that. I never gave a flip about drinking like normal men. I was about getting smashed and oblivion as often as I could. And that's not everybody's story. That's mine. Well, so I go by, next thing I know, I come out of a 5-day blackout. Now, I didn't have many of those. I had a lot of those blackouts where you don't remember the drive home, and you can't remember if the car's in the driveway or not. But I mean, this was a 5-day blackout. I don't remember nothing. And I'm sitting on the bed at the edge at my mother's house. I should tell you that I was so poorly treated as a child that I ran away from home for good at the age of 28. I'm serious. Never went back. Now I had some cribs and places I'd lay up in the meantime, but like any good gangster, we always wind up back at mom's house, and I come out of this blackout, and I'm on the edge of the bed at my mother's house, and I passed out with my clothes on, because in my right jeans pocket, I had $8, and in my left pocket, I still had all those pawn tickets. And we've all had those mornings, where you're just going, oh no, because now I'm out of tricks, man, and I got nothing, and I don't feel very good. And I'm not a sociopath. I'm worried about it for a minute, but I'm not a sociopath. I'm not going to sell my dad's shotgun for $40, that he's had my whole life. But I'm out of tricks. So I have to go to my dad, who is a good man, and say, Dad, listen, if we act now, I can get you a pretty good deal on all your stuff. But if we wait till tomorrow, it's going to be strictly retail. And my God, I almost have to tell that like it's funny, because if I touch the desperation of that morning of having to go to my dad and say, I've pawned all your stuff and I can't get it out of the pawn shop yet, I'll come unglued, because my dad was a good man. Nobody was giving him his stuff, and here's his little son out there pawning everything. And so and Dallas is a big town, so it wasn't just go to the pawn shop. It's we got to go over here and get your deer rifle, go out there to get your shotgun, go over here to get your sterling silver and your coin collection. And so it was all day in the car with me and my dad and all that shame. And when we'd be driving around, I'd be going, Dad, I swear to God, I will never do this again. I don't want to feel like this. I don't want you to feel like this. I will never do this again. And if I'm lying to that man, I damn sure didn't know it, because it felt like I meant it with every fiber of my being. What I didn't know, riding with him in that truck that day, was that I didn't have the power to make good on that promise. When I was promising him that I was never going to do that again, it'd be like promising you people I could flap my arms and fly around the room up here. Because within 3 days, I'd hit the back door of his house like a cat burglar, and it'd just be that, and off we'd go again. And by the time I got to you people, my father and I had made the rounds to the pawn shops 3 times. That's how cool I was. That's how slick I was. I was a burden to anyone that loved me or was unfortunate enough to be closely associated with me. That's the man I brought to Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's the project I presented to my first sponsor. Well, now I really want to get rolling because there's some important stuff I want to talk about. Because I had my biggest spiritual awakening at 17 years of sobriety. And I want to try to get to that tonight. But I got to touch on a little bit of my first period of sobriety. So it's kind of like what it was like, what happened, then what happened, and what it's like now. Because I come to AA, I went to a treatment center and they brought me to you people, and I thought, and I get a sponsor, and we're going to meetings, and I was very fortunate because I loved the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't know how fortunate I was. You know, that's not everybody's story. Not everybody comes into the rooms of AA and just loves the fellowship and all the alcoholics and the laughter and everything. There's a lot of people that don't care for it at all. Well, I was fortunate, and I had a very strong step 1 experience, and I worked the steps, and I thought I was a big book guy. Mark Houston used to like to say, how do you know what you don't know? That'll give you a brain cramp if you think about it. How could I possibly know what I was missing? Because I worked the steps. I was a big book guy, but I missed an awful lot. And I want to do a quick summation of the way my program was back then. And I used to feel embarrassed about talking about this until I realized how much company I had, you know, because what it was, I came in and you know, are you alcoholic? Well, yeah, I must be. You know, I don't know anybody drinks more than I do. We didn't talk about physical allergy and mental obsession and qualifying me and that sort of thing. So yeah, I'm alcoholic. Do you believe in God? Well, we're going to have to dance around that one for a little while, you know. So finally I got okay with the God as you understand him thing, you know, that we throw the doors wide open on that one. And thank God we do. And then on the 3rd step, we went right to get down on your knees and do the 3rd step prayer. And so we do the 3rd step prayer, I write inventory, and my first inventory was just kind of like a big confession, right? So all the stuff I felt bad about, people I was mad at, and that sort of thing. And then I do a 5th step where he basically sat there and listened to me read my 4th step. Oh, by the way, my first 4th step had 3 columns: who I was mad at, what they did, how it affected me. And then by the time we get to 6 and 7, whatever, you know, you just kind of phone those in. And then I go out and I make my amends list, and I go make amends to people. But I was amazed before I was halfway through, you know, and that amends list found its way into the drawer. I made what I call the tornado amends. If we're a tornado roaring its way through the lives of others, the first people that would have been touched by that tornado, I made amends to them. But then, you know, you get busy, life gets good. And the problem is physical sobriety starts to look like recovery, you know, and now things are a lot better. And when I'm not drinking, things get better. I got a house, I got a new truck, I got a little money in the bank, and so that sort of thing. But I'm blowing up marriages, and, you know, I'm overdrawn at the bank all the time. And I'm in a lot of conflict, and I can't figure out what's going on. My life is better. But, you know, I get married at 2.5 years of sobriety, and about 4.5 years of sobriety, I'm blowing it up, you know? And so we break up, and I waited the appropriate amount of time to get into another relationship, right? 16 days. And I would go running back into another relationship, and by 7 years, I've blown up that relationship. And I can't figure what the heck is going on, because these are not my values, and I can't live up to my values. And it feels like my life is blowing up in my hands. And I remember thinking, you know what? I've tried it your way, and I'm getting knocked to the mat every time I step into the ring. I'm like, forget rigorous honesty. I'll show you what half measures mean. And I kind of pulled away from AA a little bit. Now, I was still very much an AA member. I was very much about staying sober. But let's just say I lighten up on the rigorous honesty a little bit, you know, a little insurance, a little wire fraud here and there, that sort of thing. But still going to the meetings and not really sponsoring like us. Well, God, how am I going to sum this up? I get into a dishonest marriage. And the most dishonest thing about that marriage was me. This woman did not get what she thought she was getting in that marriage. And there was a lot of money and a lot of fancy stuff. We had a penthouse apartment in New York. We had a beach house in the Hamptons. And I have my place in Texas. One day, we charter a plane to fly from East Hampton back into New York City. And we're flying along. It's July 20th, 2003. We're in a Cessna 210. And the engine quits. It's 9:30 at night, and it's dark, and we're over water, and the engine quits. And I'm going to tell the shortest version of the story I can, because they come on the radio. I'm in the co-pilot seat. Now, I'm not a co-pilot, but I put on the headphones, and I hear them saying, "You're cleared to this runway here. We're not going to make it." And he says, "You don't understand. I've lost engine power. I can't make land. We're going to have to ditch." And I'm like, what? You know, first time I've ever chartered a plane in my life, and we're going to set it down in the water at night? Well, we crash into the water. There's all this noise and spray, and then absolute silence. And I can't get my door open. I'm thinking, my God, I think we're all right. You know, that was a pretty decent landing. Well, about that time, I felt something on my knee. It wasn't much of an airplane, but it was a really crappy boat. And water just goes up like that. And now I can't get my door open. I got no air. And I'm thinking, so that's it. Well, spoiler alert, I didn't die. But I go back underwater, and I start jacking that door, and it comes open, and I pull myself out. And I'd like to tell you that when I felt my feet come free, and I'm pulling out of that plane, because I'd like to tell you my first thought was that my wife or my dog. I mean, it wasn't. My first thought was, I'm out. I'm out. You know, and I went up and I got some air, and I came back down and pulled my wife out. And then it turns out they had air in the back of the plane. And then I go back down and get the dog out. I had 5 adults, and the only non-survivor was the dog. And wound up on CNN with Anderson Cooper and all this stuff. But all that to say, well, in the last 6 minutes that we're talking here, it was the beginning of a spiritual awakening for me. And I think it's the most interesting part of my story. There's this second approach to the work, because I come back to Austin and I'm in trouble, man. I mean, a near-death experience like that can change your view on things, you know. And also I'm starting thinking, my God, that was almost it. And I got out of that marriage, and I come back. Now, Katie's husband had died. Katie and I were best friends for 20 years, like brother and sister. Zero flirtation or innuendo. It wasn't any of that. Now, her husband's passed away. I'm out of this marriage, and Katie's in trouble. And so we start kind of seeking. And I go to John Henry, because I know I'm in trouble. I go to this old timer here. I go, God dang, John Henry, I'm so self-obsessed. I can't even be in a conversation with somebody. I know this probably doesn't happen in Hattiesburg, but I couldn't even be in a conversation with somebody. If I run into Chip, I'd have to go, how you doing? You know, how are the kids? You know, and act like I give a flip about the answer, because I didn't. You know, I mean, all I thought about was me and me and me. I didn't even realize it's mentioned in our book. You know, I just knew that I was pretty damn selfish, you know. And so we start going out and carrying the message to these guys. And he takes me out to a treatment center. And there were times where I felt like I was a step ahead of these guys. You know, I'm telling them, go home and read the doctor's opinion and Bill's story. And I'd go home and read the doctor's opinion and Bill's story. And about that time, I 12-stepped a friend of mine into the La Hacienda Treatment Center. And he had a little pill problem. He was taking 125 Vicodin a day. And turns out that's at least one too many. But he goes to this treatment center and he meets this guy with an eye patch from Texas named Chris R. And he gets on fire. And now I'm doing work, he's doing work, and our conversations are changing. Every morning, we're spending an hour on the phone talking about working with these guys. And what do you do when they say that? Well, so I go to this part of the book. Well, have you ever heard of the bedevilments? No, where are they? Well, they're on page 52. What do they say? And we're having conversations like that. And we're starting to have a new experience. And about that time, Katie and I find a flyer for this workshop, and it says Mark H. and this other guy. And I told Katie, I said, you know, I don't know. Mark sponsors Chris, and I really like Chris. I bet we'd like Mark. And we get, that's about how much thought went into it. And we get in the car and drive 230 miles to go to this big book weekend. It was a big book experience. I mean, it was so weird because, you know, looking back on it, we didn't even choose to go to that conference. God moved us to that weekend. I mean, there's no question about it. You know, Mark had been silent for 3 years, and here comes Katie and Charlie. It was almost like looking back on it. I can see where God picked up Charlie and Katie and put Mark there. First time he talked anywhere in 3 years. And the ripple effect of that weekend has been immeasurable, because I'm telling you, we were sitting there and Mark is talking about stuff, and I was just like, I mean, I'm a front pew sitter. I'm sitting right up front. And at one point, I lean over to Katie and I go, my God, what book is he reading from? And she's like, I think it's the big book. I mean, he's saying stuff I had never heard before. And you know, if you don't hear me say anything else tonight, get a hold of some Mark Houston CDs and check him out. I can't even tell you how many times people have come up to me and said, Mark Houston changed my whole life, and I never even met him. I just listened to him on CDs. I was lucky enough to have him as my sponsor for 4 years, and it changed everything for me. He's been passed for 10 years, but I just want to finish it up by saying, God dang, I wish I had more time. It changed everything. We started, you know, doing inventory at a different level. Pages 60 to 63 exploded. Turns out selfishness and self-centeredness became huge in my program. It changed everything. It changed my whole inventory process. It changed what we're talking about in the 5th step. 6 and 7 had real meat on them because we're taking stuff right from the 4th column of that inventory. And now we're getting out making amends to everybody we've harmed, and all these things. And actually doing 10th step spot check inventories through the day, taking that stuff into evening review, taking those considerations into my morning meditation, asking God to help me through the day, and watching for it with the 10th step throughout the day. And the steps became circular rather than linear. And it changed my whole life. I wish I had enough time to tell you, but it just exploded. I had a meeting at the house for the last, I don't know, 15, 20 years, and with my boys, and we started the primary purpose group 15 years ago, and we're running 225 people. And it's just, all I can tell you, I just want to close by saying, for the last 18 years, I have been on fire with the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I almost missed it. If I'd have died in that plane crash, I would have missed it. If you'd have come to me when I had 17 years and said, Charlie, what's going to change your life and set you on fire is the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, coming right out of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, I would have told you, you're nuts, man. I've been in AA for 17 years. I know what it has to offer me. I'm telling you, I'd never stuck a toe in the water. There's a line in our book that's, you know, there's a line on page 152 that says the most satisfactory years of our existence lie ahead of us. But I believe in turning statements into questions. Ask yourself, is that your belief? Does it seem like the most satisfactory years of our existence lie ahead of us? Or does it feel like it peters out after 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years? There's a lot. If you're new, we love you and we're glad you're here, and we hope you stay and become a part of our lives and everything. But there's a lot of message in AA for the newcomer out there. I'm here to talk to what I call middle management. I am sick of us losing middle management. We are in dark, tough times right now, and the cumulative effect of this lockdown is tough on drunks. And I'm so sick of losing people with 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. There's more available, and just get with somebody that's done the work out of this book and tell them, show me how to do it. You won't believe what will happen to your life. I'm Charlie Parker. I'm alcoholic. Thanks for having me.